I'm live. Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, what was I thinking? I've watched all of the reflections videos for our Circle of Hands Venture 4. I haven't actually watched the video of the game itself yet, but it's still fresh in my mind because it's maybe 24 hours since we actually started Venture 4. And so I figured that I ought to get on with what was I thinking before I completely forget what I was thinking. And in these videos, we talk about why we made the decisions we did as the non-player characters. Why did we do the things that we did, or why did they do the things that they did? So I'll jump right in. As I kind of mentioned before in my reflections video, it was a little bit of a conundrum to figure out, well, how to start the first scene and how to introduce the characters or the Circle Knights to the named characters. And it really depended upon which Circle Knights actually got chosen, how that scene would be set up. And it actually worked out very well because, Werther was a gentry and Ivo is a freeman soldier. These are the named characters. And it turned out that the two Circle Knights chosen, you know, uh, that Anselm is once again, he's a soldier and a freeman, so he kind of matches right up with Ivo in terms of social rank and status. And in the meantime, the character of Ingolf is a peasant farmer, but he's also a Circle Knight. And because Werther and Ivo were these lifelong friends, and Ivo kind of had this rank and station really that didn't match up with his social standing, so to speak. He got to sit with Werther, which meant that it was kind of natural or easier to seat Anselm next to him and then Ingolf there. So that kind of worked out pretty. That's why that scene ended up the way it did. So it actually worked out pretty well. A lot of what happened after that was really informed by the charm rolls. Things would have gone very differently in terms of how I depicted the reactions of the NPCs and the actions of the NPCs if the charm rolls had gone differently. As it turned out, both of them managed to have successful charm rolls with Ivo. And Ivo was this character that was a manipulator. He was very cunning. He was somebody that was really, prone to a lot of machination and getting, putting himself in the right position. And that's something he'd done all of his life. Being friends with Werther, Werther was not stupid, but he was not terribly bright. And neither of them were terribly charming. In the, I had in my head the reason that Werther had the position that he did and was managed to hold on to it was that he was just so formidable and ruled the village, as it were, with an iron fist. That in one-to-one combat, he would easily best most people. He had a quickness of 8. He was very, very good at combat, and there were other members of the gentry, even the members of his clan, but they weren't named characters. They didn't have names unless somebody said, "I want to go speak to another member of the gentry," in which case I would have thrown a name at them and we could have gotten information that way. That's not what the Circle Knights ended up doing. But the point being that Ivo had a lot of he was always looking out for his best interest. So when the Circle Knights charmed him, that doesn't mean that they're going to get what they want necessarily. That means he sees them as a resource. In the meantime, it was actually very fitting that that Werther saw, had a successful charm roll, or there was a successful charm roll made by Anselm towards Werther. So Werther saw Anselm as kind of a resource, but didn't really think very much of Ingolf at all. And that kind of seemed very natural in terms of the social station. Well, who was this peasant? Who was this farmer? I guess we'll let him sit at the table, but I don't particularly like him. Circle Knight, Circle Schmight. Who cares? So that kind of worked out pretty decently. But then after that, the a lot of the interactions that the player characters had were with Ivo, and I had, well, what ended up happening was I figured, seeing as Ivo had been successfully charmed by these two fellows, he saw them as a resource, and one of the things that he was really worried about was this untenable situation with the witch. This wasn't something that he knew was going to last forever. The village was already under a considerable amount of psychological strain because of the continued attacks over the last 18 years or so. And it was almost at the breaking point there. People were just, sooner or later, the people are going to rebel and they're not happy living there. They might not rebel, but they've had the will to live kind of sucked out of them by this. They might just leave, and now he has no village to be, a big shot in. But with the witch there, things are a lot different. People are kind of going along with this idea of raiding other villages and bringing back sacrifices, and sometimes sacrificing their own because they're scared of this witch. But also, you know, it's only a matter of time before people decide that, one of their biggest problems is the fact that their leaders are going along with this. He knows that. So he needs to get rid of this witch in some way, shape, or form. Werther, on the other hand, thinks she might be this great resource because he's just kind of brutal. Even though she's killed his kid, he's still looking out for keeping himself in power. Because he's just vain and full of himself, and he's kind of blind to a lot of things. That's the way I kind of thought of him. A lot of his secret to his success has been Ivo, and him setting things up in the right manner, and making sure that he's right there to receive the crumbs off the table, so to speak. So he figures perhaps these Circle Knights will maybe take care of this witch, but he's not going to tell them. He's going to go show them. Now, had they failed the charm roll, he would have seen them as a threat. And my plan was, he was probably going to, because he was the one that was bringing the sacrifices to the witch. He was the guy that did a lot of the dirty work. So he was going to bring her enough sacrifices to get her, let her know that the Circle Knights were in town. Give her enough sacrifices that she could sacrifice them and pump up her brawn, as Black Wizards are able to do by sacrificing other people. So she was, very powerful at that point. Let her know they're coming, and she would have raised some Draugr and been able to meet the Circle Knights, with quite a bit of force right when they showed up. That's not what happened. So he didn't want her to be aware. He didn't want her to bolster herself up. That would have been fun if that happened, to be honest with you. But that's not what happened. That's not the way the charm rolls went. So he was more seeing the Circle Knights as not a threat to be eliminated, but because he probably would have seen them as somebody that would have threatened his station. That they might want to change everything around here. But now, even though that might be the case, he sees them more as a resource to get rid of one of his problems. They do. That's kind of amazing. He's a little bit shocked and surprised when that goes on. As far as what was I thinking with the witch at that moment, I was of two minds. I kind of had a moment of regret after the game, but not really, because I was depicting her. I figured at that point, Feist had gone a little bit batty. She'd gone a little bit crazy. She'd, the more that Rabaja had consumed her, and that she was consumed, really got into that. The less in touch with reality she actually was. She wasn't out for power. She wasn't out for anything like that. She was just, steeped in the purity of this, crazy force. I could have had her, as soon as the Circle Knights came there, at least raise up some Draugr and, try to make a successful charm roll, of which she had a very high charm. And, I could have had her do that. I could have had her send a beacon right away and see if the Lich would send her the Nizag right away. But I decided not to. I decided to have her just be a little bit nuts and more taunting the Circle Knights somewhat, kind of ignoring them, kind of seeing them as, beneath contempt, so to speak. And once the combat actually started, it was a matter of pumping brawn and seeing if she could get there first. And as it turned out, Anthony, had Anselm so eager to dispatch this witch that happened. There was interesting things that I noticed about the combat system. When you go all out attack, especially if you have a pretty good quickness to begin with, of which Anselm did. There were a lot of characters that had really great quickness. Anselm did, and so did Werther. They both had quickness, I think, of 8, which is extraordinary. Because, if you go all out attack, you're using, 16 points already towards your attack, plus whatever you roll. The witch herself, didn't wear armor. It didn't seem appropriate for her to wear armor. She also didn't have the highest quickness. I put a lot of her points into brawn and into charm, because that seemed more appropriate to the kind of stuff that she would do. And I also had to take some points away from her from the last venture, because the highest rated Circle Knight didn't have as many points as Kai Ernst did the last time. So there just wasn't that, I didn't have as many points to spread around to her to bump her stats up. So I think she lost about 3 points in that equation. At the end of the day, she simply didn't roll enough to defend herself successfully against completely being destroyed, having her brawn and her quickness reduced to, below 0, because Anthony rolled extremely well. And I think she had a brawn of something like 8 or 7 at that point. And, he rolled, over 14. So at that point, he completely annihilated her brawn and her quickness. So, he had the opportunity and option to kill her, and kill her he did. And she, I believe, went on total defensive, but it didn't matter. Her quickness was not that high. It was something like a 4, and she just didn't roll very well. So when you go out for all attack, you leave yourself very vulnerable. But especially if you're a formidable opponent to begin with in terms of quickness or brawn, you do a tremendous amount of damage. And this shows up again in the venture. At that point, I started to really have to make some decisions that I wasn't prepared to make or didn't anticipate. And now all of a sudden they're talking about this idea of having Ivo go back and talk to Werther about righting the wrongs. And before that, I kind of did a bit of an info dump with Ivo. It seemed like the way the venture was going, partly there were meta reasons, looking back on it, and partly though there were very in character reasons for the reason that I kind of had Ivo sort of spill the beans about the backstory, of what happened, what did Werther do, stealing the wife of the smith, and the fact that he had the smith wrongly accused and murdered and all this kind of stuff, and Ivo doesn't know what exactly happened because things went very badly after that, and ever since then the village has trouble, and Ivo's an intelligent guy, but these are also very superstitious people. It just happens that in the Crescent Lands, a lot of the superstition is based on truth and fact, not like our own safe little world. So it seemed, from a meta reason, it seemed like at this point the things were moving rather fast, and I didn't imagine the Circle Knights were then going to go back into town and ascend a bunch of people and find out through interacting with the populace, which was a possibility in the beginning of the adventure, to kind of piece together maybe this might have been what happened, or this is part of the underlying tension in the community. Because a lot of other people believe that this is what happened, or that somehow Werther brought down judgment. But Werther's also this very scary guy, and you don't want to cross him because he'll kill you right in the middle of the street. That was kind of how I envisioned things. But at this point, there was a meta concern of like, well, okay, I might as well make this information available, but also, once again, Ivo's a guy that's out for himself and is a very manipulative person. At this point, he's seen that the Circle Knights are able to dispatch this creature. He's not sure what's going on the top of Ward Hill. He's not sure what's going on in terms of what's actually troubling the village, but he figures, I don't have to go do it. I'm not going to put myself in danger, but these guys might be crazy enough to actually go do it. And what's the worst that could possibly happen? They go up there, they get killed. We're back to square zero. No loss. And I know Ashton had these troublesome guys around at this point. So a lot of that outside of meta was Ivo simply being manipulative. Okay, well, I'll kind of drop this bomb and see what you guys do with that. And then they want him to go help. This was a more of a conundrum. Do I really want to go with with these guys? And I figured maybe they'd go sneak up, but now they really want to convince Werther to go be a man. And that was something that was a bit of a conundrum for him, but I finally figured that Ivo would go along with this because he's been having this long-standing argument with Werther for a long time. That something's up. You need you've done something wrong, and I wanted a lot of what I had in my mind as I was creating the venture is this idea that's been a long-standing bone of contention or argument between them. They're friends. That this is something that they, just like a bunch of the old men that have that argument that's been going on for 20 years, that sort of thing. It's not going to destroy their friendship, but it's that point of, where they grade against each other. I don't know if you can relate if you're an old man like me, but that happens sometimes. So it seemed like that would be something he might actually do. So I went with it because it seemed plausible, and it also seemed kind of interesting. This is not a way I thought the venture was going to go. And, so, hey, why not? This ought to be kind of interesting. So there they are, trying to convince Werther to go be a man. This was a pretty interesting scene as well. He doesn't really like Ingolf, but, he sees Anselm as somebody that's at least a resource. And Anselm really kind of, Anthony portrayed this guy in this way that he's really this romantic, part of this grand scheme, and really people ought to do the right thing. And it was kind of this tipping point. I figured at this point where there's a little off balance because they've actually killed the witch. This is unbelievable because he wasn't able to do it. He's a little ticked off that like this thing that he can use as a resource is gone. But maybe these guys might actually be able to do something about this bigger problem. Maybe. But and so he had this big wrestling match in his mind. Envisioning this, and when Ingolf actually even makes that, that statement, and he's furious at Ingolf. Even the peasants, even the farmers are telling me what to do. But it was this thing. Well, I don't want to be shown up, especially by this upstart farmer, Circle Knight. They're braver than I am. I'll go up there, but I'm not going to, I'm not going to do this openly. So, I had him decide to go do that. It's funny because a lot of the battles that were fought in this game weren't combat, or in terms of invoking the combat system, they were psychological battles that were going on back and forth between the the named characters and the player characters. Sometimes with with Ivo manipulating the Circle Knights, and a lot of times with the Circle Knights, scoring some psychological victories, kind of making these guys do what they wanted to do as well. So that was very, very interesting. I didn't see the need to actually invoke any more of the system. It wasn't that like they were trying to stop somebody from doing something, in which case I might have had to make a charm versus 12 roll. But they've already succeeded in a charm roll, these fellows, or except for Ingolf with Werther. That was a different story. So then what happens? Well, behind the scenes, I figured, Werther and Ivo are still duplicitous people, and the part of the tripwire also was, if the Circle Knights go up to Ward Hill and Werther knows about this, he's going to order his guards to kill them. So I already had that in place. That was going to happen. So I figured, well, he's going to tell them beforehand. So before the Circle Knights and our two named characters actually go up to Ward Hill, Werther already instructs his people, this is what's going to happen. This is what we're doing. When we come down, kill them, because they've they're bad people. He just wanted to get rid of them anyway. And this also was, I believed, something that, I figured, well, I was probably going to be in on this. And in fact, I decided, well, he was, because he's so duplicitous. And the idea that, not sure what's going to happen up here, but we need to get rid of these guys afterwards. So pretty nasty stuff, but it worked. It fit with the tripwire that was already in place. I had to honor the tripwire. And so I figured, well, how would this actually happen? And I said, yeah, these guys are, especially Ivo, pretty duplicitous. And Werther, not so much duplicitous, but vain and proud and stubborn. So, but they do at the same time don't want to get shown up. Ivo goes up there because, okay, well, I got to go do this, and we'll see what happens up here. And then it gets kind of interesting. Once they get up there, the haunt materializes, and I felt bad about the fact that the first part of the combat was an NPC versus the haunt. It really, I feel like, in both cases, as Eloy said, he didn't get his REH combat out of the scene. With the witch, had she been more proactive or successful at her bring herself front of the line, or didn't die in the first round, so to speak, she'd have raised Draugr. She would have summoned or put out a beacon and eventually got the Zag there. Things would have gone very differently. That first one was kind of more roll of the dice, and based upon the charm roll. Had they not been charmed, or had they not charmed Ivo, he would have brought half the people there as sacrifices, and then say, "Oh, why don't you come and see this?" And then it would have been a different story. He would have gotten his RH combat, and probably lost. But here, I felt bad because, I had to do what the fiction and the situation demanded at that point. The haunt materializes because somebody's there, and especially somebody that reminds them of the situation. And who would remind the author of his situation more than the guy that condemned him to death actually showing up there? The haunt shows up, and these two hate each other. And word has been brought up there to make things right, but he doesn't. In his mind, it's not like apologizing to this fellow, to this specter. So he does the thing that makes the most sense for him, is to kind of swing at it with his sword, ineffectually to begin with, which is the exact wrong thing you want to do to a haunt, but it made perfect sense. And so then the haunt, transforms into a physical being, as is in the rule book, so to speak, in the bestiary, and then it's on. And at that point, we go by quickness order, and it was really luck of the draw. I mean, it would have gone very differently because Werther and Anselm both had a quickness of 8. I believe there was a D6 roll after that to break the tie, and Werther won. It was what it was. Had he not won that, then you know, Anselm would have been the first one to attack. But this is not what happened. This is the way the dice went. And once again, I found it made perfect sense in the fiction first for these two to hate each other and to attack each other with abandon. Okay, for the Haunt and for Werther. So Werther's up. He draws the Haunt into a clash. The Haunt is not going to simply defend. He's going to attack him back. He hates him. He hates him above all other people at that point. And so I decided they're both going to go full attack. They're not going to split their quickness. They're going to put all their quickness into the attack. Both of these people are incredibly formidable. Werther has this very high quickness of 8, so it gets doubled, putting right into his attack. The Haunt has a quickness of 6, so it's not as high, but he's still putting like all these 12 points into that attack. Neither of them are putting anything onto their defense. So they're simply going by their roll. They both rolled. I forget exactly what they rolled. But then, Werther has an armor of 10. The Haunt has an armor of 6 that are able to mitigate some of that damage. But I remember Werther rolled fairly well, but he's also, got this quickness. He already got 16 points going towards that attack. And the Haunt itself has a brawn of 12. So he's putting all of that into his attack. So these two bash each other, kind of simultaneously, and they both do this tremendous amount of damage. Werther strikes his foe and really brings him down quite a bit. Does quite a bit of damage. I think he did something like, God, I think it was like 13 points of damage to this thing. So, or maybe it was 11. Whatever. We brought his quickness down to 1 point, and his brawn, down, to like something like 7, which is still pretty formidable. But the point being that it wouldn't take very much to kill this creature now. Maybe for his quickness down, maybe a little bit lower than that. But what the point was that between Anselm and Ingolf, they were able to attack this creature and kill it without it ever having a chance to attack them back or go back to its original form, because that's what would have happened. And I kind of flipped a coin. Do I have this thing instantly before they can act? Go back into this kind of spectral form, or do I let it take this kind of round? And everything's kind of happening at once, more or less. So I decided to be fair. It made the most sense to let them at least, complete their action before that happened. And, well, as it turned out, they killed it. And so why did Ivo run? Ivo wasn't scared. Ivo saw the great opportunity. This thing might kill them all. They might kill it. Who knows what's going to happen? But I'm not going to be here to watch that. I'm going to be here to take care of the aftermath alive. And, things could go my way in various ways. So that's why he ran. He wasn't scared. Once again, he was being duplicitous and looking out for himself. As it turned out, at that point, they were they're trying to convince Ivo to be the leader. And, Ivo was vain enough and scheming enough to start to get this idea that maybe that might work. I've been the number 2 guy in this community in a lot of ways. And so they managed, because of their charm, to kind of their charm rolls, to kind of convince him that this might be this great course of action. He's got the sword of Werther. This might work out really well. And so for the end of it, why did the fellows at the bottom of the trail, kill Ivo and then start to try to kill the Circle Knights? It was the way I interpreted the tripwire and the relationship of the people with Ivo and with Werther. At this point, they've kind of seen Werther's body fall off the cliff, and it's kind of nice that their leader's dead, but still their leader's dead, and nobody knows why Ward Hill is forbidden, or if it's haunted. They might be superstitious, but these Circle Knights only showed up a month ago, and now all of a sudden, our leader's been assassinated and killed. And also, I decided that Ivo was not the most well-liked person. He doesn't have really high charm. Neither did Werther. There was kind of this iron fist thing going on. And so, I felt, Ivo was a low martial person, but probably still in charge of, and as well in terms of like being a sergeant or something, or the Viking analog to that. That he was in charge of a lot of these people, but he wasn't particularly nice. And also, there was nothing in the tripwire that said that these guys were then going to kill them. It said that he was going to order them to go capture and kill them. But that is still their orders. They still have just seen their leader killed. They see this guy that people just kind of know was a snake, with the sword, and saying, "Well, now I'm the leader," and they decide, no, that's not the case, and they kill him, and then run these foreigners, these upstarts, these circle knights out of town and try to kill them as well. You know, so it seemed the most plausible at that moment for this to happen. And probably one of the most magical moments of the entire game for me was Anthony's eyes. I don't know if you can catch it in the Hangouts, the little box there, but his eyes get like saucers when I say, oh, and then they fill them full of arrows after this speech. That's fantastic. So that's what I was thinking, you know, in the game. And once again, like I thought that like there are points in the combats that, could have gone differently. And it was a little disappointing, but I didn't want to massage it or manipulate it in a meta manner. As it turned out, the character of Werther did so much damage to this haunt that it was relatively easy for the fellows to dispatch it. Had he not been there, or had he not been the first one to attack, say Anselm had been the first one to attack, good chance that haunt would have ripped him right in half. It just happened to be, in that case, Anselm was lucky losing that tie-breaking roll. Maybe not lucky in terms of being a hero, but lucky in terms of being able to walk or run out alive. Anyhow, that's what happened, and that's what I was thinking. And this is another long video.